Hi, this is the Rex Andrews Show. If you found us for the first time, welcome. Glad to have you in the conversation. Love to have you with us. And if you're a return listener, I just have one thing to say. Thank you. Thank you. We recently found out in the last week that the show has cracked the top 10 fastest growing podcasts out there. And that's pretty exciting. And it's all because of you, the listeners. Why it's also exciting is there are more than 1 million podcasts in the iTunes store. So quite an accomplishment, but has nothing to do with me, everything to do about you. All right, a little bit of house cleaning. Let's have just a quick reminder to subscribe wherever you are listening to your podcast, and we are everywhere that we know of. And then if you would like to follow the show, you can do it on YouTube, subscribe there to the channel. And then also you can listen anytime on the show website, rexandrewshow.com. All right, another great story today. I'm excited to have this guest here because I know nothing about this topic, and he's an expert in it, and it's pretty exciting. My guest is an expert in emotion freedom techniques, okay? And I don't know anything about that, so we're going to learn something today. So welcome, and joining the show today is Eric Almeida, right?
Almeida, yeah, you got it.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, I'm just crazy about that.
It's all good. Well, thanks so much for having me, Rex.
Glad to have you. Well, Eric, it's good to understand this. I know you're focused on a lot of this right now, but tell us how you got here. I mean, I want to know sort of what they call the backstory these days. That's kind of a big buzz term. I want to talk about, Eric's beginning, because we're all accumulation of the steps and hops we've made to date, and then we'll do other interesting things in the future. So, Eric, where'd you grow up?
So I grew up in the suburbs of New York City in Rockland County. So for people who know of Westchester, it's the county on the other side of the Hudson River.
Oh, fantastic. All right.
Yeah.
So what was your family makeup? Siblings, parents? What did all that look like?
So my parents are immigrants from Portugal. So I'm first generation. I have 2 older half siblings from my dad's first marriage, and then I have a younger brother.
Fantastic. Okay. So there's 4 of you in the mixed family, right?
Yes.
Now, when did your parents immigrate?
So my mother came over when she was 13 with her whole family, and my father came over when he was 18. He literally hopped off the boat. So he was originally an illegal immigrant when he came to the country, but then, obviously he's in his 70s now. He's long since become a citizen since then. So
fantastic. So was it just the quest to get to a better life? Was it fleeing something back in the homeland? What was it look like for your parents?
So from what they've described, Portugal was really rough during that time. It was when they were growing up, it was communism was kind of trying to happen, even though, Portugal's in Europe and things like that. So it was iffy there. So there just really wasn't much promise for them. And so they both were like, let's go to the States. It could be a better life there.
Sure. Okay. So your parents got here, and how'd they meet up? I mean, they came from Portugal. Were they from originally the same towns or provinces, or?
No, it was kind of funny. So their hometowns in Portugal are about 45 minutes apart, but they met here they met here in the States. My mother was in her mid-20s. She was working at some kind of, I should know this better. She was working at some kind of shop, and my father just came in, and that's kind of how they met.
Okay.
And then they were in the same Portuguese community group. There's pockets of that throughout the Northeast over here. And so that's kind of how they connected, and they connected after my father had already gotten divorced.
Okay. So when you came along, were there other siblings from the previous marriage that already existed then?
So my oldest sister, so my older sisters are 16 and 10 years older than me. So my oldest sister joined us relatively early on, right when the divorce happened.
Okay.
And so when I was born, she was already living with us. And then my younger sister stayed with her mother for a little bit longer of a time before she eventually ended up joining my family.
Okay.
That happened, I think, either when my brother was born or when my mother was pregnant with my brother. So this is certainly, a lot of this is predating me a little bit.
Well, okay, great. So with that blended family but you still had the unification of the culture being from Portuguese. Mm-hmm. How was that growing up in sort of a blended family?
From my perspective, it made no difference. Like they're my sisters. They've been around since forever. From my perspective, forever. I make the distinction of half siblings just to explain the age difference.
Sure.
But other than that, it's, they're my family. And I will admit, coming from a Portuguese family, I rejected it a lot when I was younger. Just because it was, I wanted to be a normal kid, and, being the son of immigrants, even, it changes things, and like, you don't get exposed to certain things in the same way. So like, there's lots of Disney movies I've never seen because my mom and dad just didn't know about them, and things like that. Like all those, like those kind of like cultural differences you may not notice compared to like a full American family kind of thing. So, we went to the Portuguese Community Center a lot for many, many, many holidays. They've ruined New Year's for me. I don't care about New Year's at all. There's only so many years where you can listen to accordion music and before you want to blow your brains out. So it was really funny in the Portuguese Community Center. All the kids, all the first generation, would be outside in the freezing cold in New York.
Yep.
Instead of being inside with the parents,
because they didn't want
to be around it. They didn't want to be around it. And so I'll admit, for a long time, I really kind of poo-pooed my heritage. And then it wasn't until I got older and really started to realize like the specialness of it, and being able to go to Portugal as an adult compared to being forced to go to Portugal as a kid,
right.
which I do see as a privilege. Just in the moment, it just 3 weeks of staying with family in a country where you don't really speak the language 100%. Like, eu falo um pouco português, but like I could survive in Portugal. Like I won't die if you drop me there.
Right.
But like I can't have an in-depth conversation like I'm having with you. So like if we went to a restaurant, I can say, okay, this thing that you're ordering, it's beef. There's going to be a potato. I don't know anything else. And so that kind of thing. So yeah, it was, I ended up appreciating it as I got older, and really was able to just kind of get a taste of how unique the culture is and how much more relaxed it is compared to the States.
Right.
And actually, when I brought my husband there for the first time, and that was his first time ever out of the country, he just loved it. And now we're trying to plan our lives around, before all this COVID nonsense happened, plan our lives around trying to spend time there every year.
Yeah.
Like, so yeah,
I laugh at your story because my mother plays the accordion.
Oh,
and
I'm not even going to comment.
No. The funny angle on that is we don't mind when she gets it out. We're really happy when she puts it away.
Yeah, it's yes. I don't want to completely
no.
music,
it's a crazy instrument. It's a crazy instrument.
It's a crazy instrument.
I mean, it's like hanging around a mariachi band in Mexico, right? It's crazy. So
yes, it's pretty hilarious.
All right, so fast forward. Let's get. What was your education like?
So I went to the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, which is in Western Massachusetts, which is still where I live in that area still today. And I went and got my degree in psychology with the intention of becoming a therapist.
Okay.
And when I graduated from college in 2007, I worked at a program here in the Pioneer Valley, which is this region I'm in. That was a residential program for children.
Okay.
And I did that for about a year. And I walked away from that and I was like, I cannot work in mental health right now. It was a lot of the kids had gone through the foster care system. It was a lot of really sad, unfortunate stories. And I was what was called a resident Milu counselor, which is basically a glorified version for a babysitter. So I did that, I did that job, and then I realized that I wasn't emotionally strong enough to handle mental health at that time in my life. So I was 21, 22 doing that. So I still wanted to help people. That was why I went for psychology. I wanted to help people. It's been something I've been wanting to do my whole life. And so I ended up kind of scratching that itch by going into customer service. So I worked in retail. I worked for Aeropostale, which is a clothing store, which is now defunct. I also worked in hospitality for many, many years. So I worked in a Econo Lodge for a long time. And I have plenty of stories there. That might be another podcast altogether.
Yeah, absolutely. The unwashed public are absolutely hilarious, and they don't even know it. So,
Oh my goodness, yes, yes, yeah. Lots of funny stories involving lacrosse teams and hookers
oh yeah,
and all kinds of stuff there. And so, oh goodness, there. So, still worked in customer service. When I turned 30, I realized like I need to make a change. I wasn't making a ton of money in hospitality. It's really hard in hospitality to make a lot of money. Now, good luck. And I dabbled into real estate for a while. I dabbled into working at a tea factory, doing customer service, still doing sales. And then I ended up getting a job working at a residential program for a HUD subsidized property. So it was privately owned, but it was HUD subsidized.
okay,
And so I did that for about a year or so. And it was, very stressful work. It definitely required a thick customer service facade. And for me, that was kind of the worst thing for me because all this time, I was suppressing my emotions by default. When I was growing up as, in high school, I was a very closeted gay kid. And that was back in the 90s and the early 2000s, where calling anything stupid gay was all the craze. So people,
sure,
and I was also a nerd. So I was certainly bullied a lot. And so people were calling me gay just because that's what you did. You called someone who was a loser gay, and they
sure,
were pushing a button they didn't know I had. So it made it great for me to be in customer service because I had that facade, terrible for mental health. And so when I was working in subsidized housing, I had to keep that mask even more. I had to maintain that professional distance with the residents.
hmm,
And I was doing my normal paperwork, doing what's called a recertification, which is the updating of the paperwork for you have to do every year. And I just felt like I felt sick, like something was just wrong.
right,
And so I walk over into my boss's office and I say, hey, can you cover this? I'm like, I don't feel good. And she's like,
mhm,
oh yeah, don't worry about it. So I go off into the maintenance office just to have some place to sit. And I feel worse. My hands are starting to go numb. My feet are starting to go numb. I start hyperventilating. And instantly I'm like, I think I'm having a heart attack. And I start freaking out. Now at the time I'm like 33, 34. So it's a very unlikely, but that's where my brain went.
right,
And so I pick up the phone to call an ambulance. It didn't work. These were those like voice over IP phones. So you have
yeah,
to turn on the feature to dial 911. It wasn't turned on. So
no,
I'm like, crud. It's like I need my cell phone. I left it in the office. In my office where she was still with the resident. So I walk back in, try to like put the facade back on, like shaking slightly. I walk back in, grab my cell phone, and I whisper into her ear as I'm leaving, I think I'm having a heart attack. I'm calling an ambulance. And to her credit, she was cool as a cucumber and was like, you do whatever you got to do.
right,
So I go back into the maintenance office. I call the ambulance and they send one over. Immediately after hanging up with them, I call my husband. It goes to voicemail. And I basically, in a voicemail, say to him goodbye. Because by that point, I am completely freaking out. And, he did not appreciate that message at all, scared the crap out of him. And so the last thing I remember after that is kind of putting my head on the desk. I've got fluids flowing out of every orifice from my face. I'm crying, like a snot and drool, and I lose time. I had that instance where like my vision kind of coned in, like you're about to faint.
right,
And then the next thing I remember is the paramedics opening the door. So I have no idea how long I was kind of just lying there on the desk. And so they're like, hey, are you Eric? And I'm like, yes. And I'm like, okay, what's going on? I described to them what I'm feeling. So they put the blood oxygen meter on my finger. They put the blood pressure cuff on my arm. They
hmm,
check my vitals. And they're like, okay, we got good news and bad news. Good news is you're not having a heart attack. Bad news is you're having a panic attack.
right,
And I'm just like, oh, dear God. And so I'm like, okay, that's better than a heart attack, but still
sure,
terrible. So they calm me down, with some breathing techniques and things like that. My husband calls me back and he's like, what the hell's going on? And I'm like, I'm okay. It's a panic attack. Can you come pick me up?
right,
I'm calm by this point. He comes, shows me up, picks me up, takes me home. I take the next day off just to kind of recover. And I try to treat it like a fluke. I'm just like, I don't know why this happened. I think it's just too much stress, blah, blah, blah. Still ignoring all this old stuff I was never dealing with. And I try to go back to work like nothing happened. And when I get there, all of those feelings start coming back. And I'm like, nope, I can't be here. And I bolt out of the property. I even drove past my boss on the way out. And, I text her and I'm like, I still don't feel up to going into work. I'll try again tomorrow. And I did. That time, I only got about halfway down the highway before I had to turn around.
wow,
And so I realized how much I was white knuckling it through my life. And the panic attack kind of took that away from me. And I lost the ability to kind of force myself to deal. And it got worse a lot faster than it got better. I ended up becoming agoraphobic. I ended up not leaving my house. I ended up taking a medical leave from that job. And I ended up confining myself to one room in my house and just alternating between being massively depressed and hysterically crying. And my husband is doing everything he can to be supportive, but he's like, I don't know what to do with this. Like, I'm just completely freaking out. And so I contacted a therapist that I had met through in a business group I was part of. And I said to her, I'm like, hey, I really need your help. This is what happened. And it's like, can you help? Do you have room in your schedule for me? And can we do it over the phone? Because I don't feel comfortable driving. And she was like, yes, we can do all of that. And she was a therapist who had incorporated EFT, which is the emotional freedom technique. So I started working with her over the phone for about a month. And then I end up getting the courage to go into the office. I end up leaving that job completely and then continue to do work on myself with her, seeing her in person. The agoraphobia goes away completely within about a month and a half or so.
So Eric,
yes,
for our listeners who may not understand, what is the
agoraphobia?
Yeah,
agoraphobia is fear of the outside, fear of people. So basically, it's the people who lock themselves in their home and never leave are agoraphobic. It's essentially the way it feels is that at any moment something horrible is going to happen to you, and if you're anywhere that you're exposed, you will be attacked. It's kind of how I personally experienced it, and that could be just the perception of you being hit by a car. It could be the perception of, a human's going to come after you.
Okay.
And that was kind of activated for me personally from a lot of the bullying I had when I was younger. It kind of flared all of that emotion to the surface for me. So when her and I were doing the work together, we dived into a lot of this old trauma from my past. And so the purpose of EFT is to uncover those old memories and then to release the emotion that's tethered to that. And I'll explain it in a moment how that works.
Okay.
So essentially, after working with her for a couple of months, so this was the middle of 2018. By the end of that year, I got the courage to open up my own business, and I actually opened up an antique store, which was one of the kind of when I retired jobs I wanted to do. And I got the courage to do that by doing all of this work I was doing with my therapist at the time, Sarah, with the EFT. And I had the antique store for about a year or so. And then I closed it back in March, right before the COVID lockdown happened here in Massachusetts. It wasn't financially viable, but I was very grateful I did it.
Right.
And it gave me a lot of connections, and it gave me a lot of exposure to owning my own business. It was my first venture into being an entrepreneur. And I got out right before the lockdown, so it would have been killed anyway.
Sure.
And so it was nice that it was under my own control. So in the middle of all of the lockdown, one of my colleagues ended up becoming a certified EFT practitioner herself. And I was like, hey, how did you do that? Like, I didn't realize you had a master's or all that kind of stuff. And she was like, no, you don't need that. There is a whole training process and a certification process and supervision and practice clients and things like that, but you don't need the fancy degrees. And I'm like, oh my God, that's great. I had no idea. And so I'm like, let me take this, let me take the training, which was all through Zoom at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And let me see if I can click with this. Cause I was still cautious about my experience working in mental health before. And I took the course and I fell in love with it. And I'm like, this is what I'm meant to do. Because by that point, I had done so much self-healing. I've regained so much of the parts of myself that I had lost. The person I was a year or two ago could not have this conversation with you, Rex, because I would be petrified of public speaking. It was part of the bullying. It was part of a lot of those kind of old memories. And so you're laughing.
Well, no, I was just, just because you've been bottled up, but because of COVID, your agoraphobic state, it's probably not a bad, that wouldn't be hard to manage, right? You could just stay in one room.
It's true. It's true that COVID would have certainly, oh my God, it would have been really bad because it would have made it very easy to stay agoraphobic.
Yeah, you could have just hung out forever.
I could have stayed home forever and just ordered food and all that kind of stuff and all that jazz. Oh, it would have been terrible. And so I went through the process of becoming an EFT practitioner. because I had gotten so much personal growth and you know, so much more in tune with my emotions, so much more confident and ambitious and in my own life. And I want to be able to give that gift to other people
Okay.
because I have seen how much it could, how much of a positive effect it's had on me. And I see how much of a positive effect it has on my clients and how quickly you can let these terrible scripts that we have in us go
Mm-hmm.
in a way that is so healthy and natural to oneself. So I'm sure your listeners are kind of like, well, what the hell is it?
Yeah. So
So
I want to unpack that a little bit, and I've got
yeah,
a transition to help us with that.
go for it.
Recently, I think about a week back, I recorded an episode with Amelia Zachary. Great story as far as a human story and triumph. She was raped in college, and it took her almost 20 years to face that and bring it to the surface and to be able to, she was 20 years before she even told her parents.
Oh
This
my God.
this happened in Asia, and great story. So you want to listen to it. But the point is, what we were talking about her situation is, it was a single event trauma that caused this, and then she hung on to it, and she hung on to it so much that it exasperated because she was bipolar like potential, and they exasperated it so much that the bipolar surfaced. And so her stress of keeping that in darn near ruined her life. And so with the EFT,
Mhm.
is it, I'm sure I know the answers and stuff. Can it be single event focused when you're working with that? Or is it like in your case where you had probably a decade plus of torment and, torture and verbal abuse or whatever it happened to be because you were a nerd, as you admitted? I mean, it takes a lot of gumption to say that. I mean, I call myself a geek, and I try to tell people that's an affectionate term. Then basically going through your life, the stress, because being a man that's gay in the United States isn't stress free. Let's just call it what it is. Okay, there's still people
For
who
sure.
don't understand that and get that, and there are things that go along with that.
Mhm.
So with EFT, is it do you think it's more the single event type thing, or is it uh, something like your case where you just had a long time of this sort of mental torment?
So it could be certainly both.
Okay.
So, so in the particular case of the woman that you interviewed, it's the rape event that happened for her, that traumatic event, seems to be a substantial linchpin for her contemporary issues that she had. So by going after that, it would have a profound impact on resolving a lot of her contemporary symptoms, whatever they were or are.
Right.
Most likely, that would probably be the most obvious one to work on with her. But most likely, there would be other tethers of where that came from, and you kind of would have to. You would go wherever. So for me, with my clients, I would go where they're ready to go. So if someone came to me and they came with me and they say, I have a fear of public speaking, and that's the thing I want to work on, and that's it. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. If that is the goal you want to set for yourself, I'm happy to work with you. We'll work on that fear of public speaking. And I'll just say to them, there's a chance we might go into other avenues that are tethered to that fear of public speaking, because
Sure.
we don't know where the rabbit hole goes of what's contributing to it until we go down the rabbit hole. So some people come in that regard, and then once that particular issue is resolved, they may choose to move on, or they may be like, oh my God, like I'm noticing improvements here and there. Why don't we just keep going and keep cleaning up the past? That happens a lot too. Other people might walk in with working with me, and they might say, my life just sucks. Like I'm depressed, or I'm anxious, or I'm angry all the time, and it's like I don't know why. And they
Right.
kind of come in with just like a general like something is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll be like, all right, we'll start on that. We'll start on that sense of, I'm not happy with my life, or I'm very easy to anger, or whatever it is. And then we'll see where they take me, and then we'll heal that. So the way it works, so what EFT is it's a mental health practice that is based on Chinese medicine.
Okay.
So I guide my clients through tapping on acupressure points on their body. So I'm going to go through them now with you, Rex.
Okay.
So there's 10 acupressure points that we tap on that are meant to activate the meridians of the body.
Okay.
And the reason why you're doing this tapping is to calm down the fight, and freeze response that we all naturally have.
Sure.
We need that response for human survival. It's the response you get if you're driving on the highway, someone's trying to merge into you, and you swerve out of the way. It's the same response you get if you're walking in the woods and a snake goes in front of you and you jump back. We need that for survival.
Right.
Where that system gets activated unnecessarily is with emotional trauma. And I'm referring to trauma with a lowercase t.
Okay.
Anything that provokes any kind of significant emotional response is what I'm referring to. So this incorporates PTSD and rape, like we mentioned before, but this could be something as minute as a friend of you said, someone in school said something stupid about you and you feel embarrassed.
Sure.
If you still remember that, there's emotion there because you should have just forgotten that by now if it was something that long ago. So the 10 points on the body that you tap on that help calm that fight. So let me step back for a second. So when an emotional event occurs, you are either in perceived danger or actual danger. So if you're giving a presentation in front of a class, it's middle school, and you're scared, your body is absorbing that fear and is like, okay, when we do this, we're scared, which means we're in danger. So your mind hangs on to that and is like, okay, the next we need to, doing something in public, doing a presentation is dangerous to us.
Okay.
And you'll keep that in the back of your mind of like, don't do that, avoid that. It's dangerous, no different than the snake or the car.
Sure.
So when you're tapping on the acupressure points, you're calming that fight, and freeze response down. You're calming down the amygdala of the brain and allowing your cognitive mind, your frontal lobe, to kind of stay engaged so that you can actually process what you're feeling and process the memory and let the emotion go.
Okay.
So the 10 points on the body are the side of the hand, the fleshy part of the palm below the pinky, the top of the head, dead in the middle. If you were to part your hair, it's dead in the middle. The same part of the baby's head where you wouldn't want to touch. Yep, right in the middle. Yep.
Okay.
The eyebrow at the bridge of the nose.
Okay.
The side of the eye at the bony socket of the occipital bone.
Okay.
Under the eye, so if you're looking perfectly straight, but directly beneath your pupil, also on the occipital bone.
Okay.
Your upper lip, between your nose and your upper lip.
Okay.
Your lower lip, so beneath your lower lip, but not the bottom of your chin, so that little crevice right there. The next part would be the collarbone, so where your throat ends, but right before your sternum begins, there's that little like divot that some people can have.
Right.
You right tapping right there. The next point after that would be under the arm, directly beneath your armpit. So for women, it would be where your bra strap is. For men, you would draw a line from your nipple directly beneath your armpit, right on your rib cage.
Right.
And then the last point would be the inner wrist, right where you'd have a watch.
Okay.
So by tapping on these points in succession, you're activating all the meridians of the body, but you're activating that energetic system, and it's calming down that fight, and freeze response. So when I have a client in session, we would start with whatever that surface issue is. Or if they know what it is, we'll go straight into the particular memory. So let's say it's going back to, we'll stay with something surface level for the moment. Let's say it's someone who's just feeling angry all the time. And so we would be tapping and I would be saying phrases and having the client repeat after me. So I would be saying, I'm angry all the time. I'm bubbling up with rage. I get so easily pissed off. I'm so irritated with everyone. And I would guide them through that and encouraging the client to repeat after me and to change any of the words to what matches to them. Because I'm using my intuition and what they said to me to make the phrases up. But it's not important what I'm saying. It's important that they are repeating back what's true to them. And what ends up happening is that surface level emotion starts to decrease. And what will typically happen is that a memory will come to the surface. And whatever that memory is somehow tethered to whatever they were just talking about. So you start with the surface level issue. and then you allow those memories to surface, and then you go after the memory. And then you process the memory, also doing the tapping technique. So maybe with the angry person that we're using as the example this time around, maybe they're so angry because no one listens to them, so they're getting frustrated. Maybe their parents always ignored them, and now when someone ignores them today, they get angry, and now they get angry quickly.
Right.
Yeah, that's a snap judgment. So we work on those memories in the past of, my mom doesn't pay attention to me. Whenever I'm asking for help, she just ignores me. She doesn't love me. She doesn't care about me, all while tapping, all while letting all of that go. And when you clear the emotion to the past memory, it will start to break down the habit that's happening today. The script will start to dissolve.
Okay.
And then all of a sudden, you won't be as easily angry. You won't be as easily triggered by certain events. You have the boss that says something to you that's annoying. You might respond back with so much anger because the boss might remind you of your mom and your dad because you have all of this old stuff from your past. But when you dissolve the old stuff from your past, you respond normally, and you're just like, he's a jerk. Who cares?
Wow.
Yeah.
So with this EFT technique, in essence, do you end up breaking that tether?
Yes. So what you end up doing is you are actually, in a way, rewiring the brain. You're rewiring the neurons that create that kind of pattern. And for a lot of people, a lot of the sources of their trauma are a lot of times it's parents, mainly because parents are so influential. It's not necessarily that all parents are bad, but parents are still human and things happen. And so essentially, in a lot of instances, when you get really into the deep core work, you end up giving your past self whatever you didn't get in the past. So, for example, going once again with like the neglectful parent thing.
Sure.
Even if you get to a situation where your modern day parent asks for your forgiveness for their actions, in the very rare instances where that happens, that's very uncommon, to be perfectly honest, assuming your parents are even alive and things like that. There is a level of satisfaction that comes from that, but it doesn't cure the years of having the script, of having that pattern that you've lived through. So when you're doing the EFT work, you're getting back in touch with these older versions of yourself. You're connecting with these younger versions of yourself. And you, as the adult version of yourself, acknowledge the pain of your past self while you're doing all this tapping, and you give, figuratively, your past self whatever you needed then. So if you needed love or compassion or understanding or protection, you give it to yourself.
Right.
And when you have those moments in session with a client when they're really connecting with the child version of them in that particular memory, it is so massively powerful, and the effect ripples out throughout their whole being in a way. It's because you're dissolving that whole script completely. It sounds like a whole lot of loopy woo-woo garbage. I know for a lot of people, they've said that to me, and I totally respect that. And it is. I believed it the same way.
Sure.
But the thing is that having gone through it myself, and then also guided other people through it myself, and seeing how much of a profound change can happen in a relatively short period of time, it's amazing. So going back to what you mentioned before about the one-time issue or not, I had a client who, our first session was several days after she had a miscarriage.
Okay.
And so that's, it was a coincidence that was just when we spoke. She scheduled the appointment before that had happened. And, that's a terrible instance for any person to go through. And so she was worried that she wouldn't be able to have a child again.
Okay.
And so that's what she walked in with. And in a single 50-minute session, she walked away feeling confident that she would get pregnant again. Now, the reason why that was so effective in just one session is because in her instance, she never had that fear before. So there was no history.
Right, brand new. Yeah.
It was brand new. And the seed of that doubt of fertility would have been planted because of the miscarriage. And we got there before she worked with me before the seed could get anywhere.
Right.
And we got rid of the seed of the doubt. So that particular traumatic event was healed before it could have any prolonged impact.
Okay.
So that's a very rare instance of this perfect timing, honestly. But that can happen where if it's something like, that's something I do recommend. It's like if you get in a car accident and it's your first car accident and it's kind of rough, but you're okay, you do want to kind of talk out the emotion that's behind that, because you don't want to develop an aversion to driving, right, or an aversion to highways or something like, or anything else that may spawn from that. So like that's where EFT can be really great. Like you can prevent a problem before it even starts. But most of the time with my clients, it's the stuff's already there. It's just, that was just a unique instance where like it was a single thing and we got it before it went anywhere.
It's interesting because in my years of being around, I'm 55, and several opportunities to go through some therapies and stuff. And it's amazing at the core of such adult behaviors, there's so many of these childhood or youth traumas that we hold on to for decades. I mean, decades. You know, fears of abandonment, fears of, child abuse and these types of things that really, when people work with therapists and stuff, are rooted out to be, that's the issue, and bad behaviors rooted back to these things. And so I really find this interesting because having some mental health in my family, health issues in my family, and the need for therapy and those types of things, I just think it's a huge frontier. And I think it's very interesting with the EFT that, this is centuries and centuries old, this technique, right?
So, well, the Chinese medicine that it is based on is centuries old. The technique was only was created back in the 70s and didn't start. Yeah, it's a relatively new technique. It was created back in the 70s and then kind of was formed into what it is today back in the early 80s. And it's slowly starting to be incorporated into other forms of conventional therapy today. Because that's the lovely thing about EFT. It's very moldable and very flexible. So a conventional therapist can add it into whatever their conventional training was. And the really lovely thing about EFT as well is that you can't do it wrong. Either it works or it does nothing.
Right.
So there's a lot of freedom with that. You can tap in any order you want. If you skip a point, it doesn't matter. If you're not tapping exactly on the point, it's not the end of the world. The main thing when you're doing it is you just have to have your intent, your mind intention on what you want to heal. So it doesn't work to tap and be completely not thinking about something. So like, could you tap and watch TV? You could, but you're not really healing anything per se. But like, if you're feeling anxious and you just happen to be watching TV and you're tapping on and you're thinking about the anxiety, then yes, it will help. So yeah. But the foundation, yes, the Chinese medicine is centuries old, but the technique itself is relatively new. So this does, like, in a lot of ways what acupuncturists are doing. They're activating this same system in their own way. There's plenty of times where I've heard from acupuncturists where some of their clients will, after a session, will be like, oh my God, like they'll start crying because the needle got into the right spot to activate the right system for them to be like, oh my God, I remember, I just kept thinking about this memory of when I was 12 with my aunt or something like that. Like that happens too, because you're still manipulating the energetic system. Reiki can do it in a similar way. Conventional talk therapy can do it in a similar way as well. There's so many modalities for healing, and EFT is just one of the many tools that can be used.
Interesting. I'm one of these people because I don't science. It's been funny when we've gone through this whole pandemic. People have said, follow the science, all right? But the crazy thing about the science is, the pandemic came upon us, and, you look at Fauci and he's flipped so many times. How can you believe a word the guy says? It's this. And so, I think people have to understand that science is the best we know at the time.
Yes.
Yeah, it's the data that we have on hand. And unfortunately, then people say, well, that's the absolute truth. Well, I don't know about that. I mean, it's kind of like the whole climate debate. And I don't want to get into this big political stuff. However, you talk to different people and they'd say, well, the models really aren't accurate, or the models this. And so a lot of people really just summarily read headlines. Okay. And
Yep.
the science we have today, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they think that because it's been defined as science, that it's absolute truth. And so you look at all the elements that we've seen here in the pandemic, and then I'm going to bring this back to you, is the fact that, there's been debates over the effectiveness of masks. There's a debates over the effectiveness of the vaccines. There's been, everything you can think of.
Yep.
This is what you do today. No mask, double mask. I mean, right?
Yep.
But the thing that drives me crazy is the fact that everybody's saying follow the science. Well, the science is best guess based on the information you have.
Yes.
So bringing that back to what you do, there might be people who say that, like you've sort of pointed out, this might be just, voodoo craziness, right?
Yep.
But I just don't think that anybody has all the answers. I just don't.
Of course. And
so it's important for us to look at this with an open mind, because wow, if I could figure out how to do EFT and unwire all these connections that have been causing me crazy, why not?
No, 100%. So 100%. It's, to go back to the science thing, science is a practice. It's a practice of creating a hypothesis, testing the hypothesis, and repeating the results.
Right.
It's a practice. And so different tests have different results, and how good the test is and things like that. You can't condense it down to a title on a news article, which is, but the problem is that's how we absorb a lot of our information nowadays, which is causing all of this strife.
Right.
And so when it comes to EFT, it is a relatively new practice. And I say to people all the time, when it comes to a person's mental health, when it comes to one's own mental health, you need to connect with the technique and the practitioner. And if you don't connect with both, it's not going to work. So if someone thinks EFT is too woo-woo for them, that's fine. I respect that. Find what works for you. Some people would rather lie on the couch. A therapist is sitting behind them, and the therapist is like, so explain to me the relationship with your mother, and like the very psychoanalytic kind of thing. And hey, psychoanalysis works. It's a great technique. I read up on Freud and Erikson and the greats as well, because their information helps me as a practitioner as well. Like, I'm not disparaging any of it. But at the same time, like, there are studies, there's an fMRI study on EFT showing how effective it can be for food cravings. There's been studies showing the efficacy of EFT in comparison to cognitive behavioral therapy, which is the most studied form of therapy in existence because it is very structured, which makes it very good for lab work. There's also been studies showing the effectiveness of EFT for treating people with PTSD, because one of the unique things that EFT can do that conventional talk therapy has a harder time with is you can tap on a traumatic issue without having to talk about it. So if someone doesn't want to, this sounds really weird, but if someone isn't ready to relive their past, this is very common for soldiers, or like you were saying with your previous interviewee with the rape instance, you can tap on an issue without having to call it out. So I'll give you a very quick, you could be like, this terrible thing happened to me. It happened by a person that I thought I could trust. And it was really terrible. And I wish it never happened. And I wish I didn't have to deal with this. And I don't feel comfortable talking about this. And I really want to let this go. I don't want this anymore. No details, no having to relive it. There's even techniques where you're so distant in EFT, where they're so distant from the issue where you're tapping on something a little bit different. It's called tapping around the issue.
Okay.
And the goal of doing that is to bring the initial charge behind that trauma is so high that the thought of even trying to look at it is too much for the client. So you slowly bring that charge down, 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 and then eventually maybe they'll want to talk about it, or you maybe never do. So I could do that with a client where they never tell me what's wrong. It makes it we have to stay pretty vague, and it makes it pretty hard, but the healing can still happen because the intention of the client is, I want this to heal.
Mhm.
And the tapping still is a letting the emotion go, even if I don't know what's going on.
Right.
And like I said, that sounds like a whole lot of nonsense woo-woo crap for some people. And like I said, I respect that. And from my personal, my personal experience is anecdotal, and the experience of my clients is anecdotal. But I continue to acquire anecdotes, which continues to reaffirm my personal belief in the effectiveness.
So that's your
And
science process.
that's my scientific process. Yes. And I also think these studies that I've read about with EFT are quite compelling. Are there limitations to those studies? Sure. They were relatively small studies. They need bigger populations.
Right.
Do the science. If someone says to me and says, we prove scientifically that EFT doesn't work, it's what's happening is this other mechanism, I'd be like, great, teach me that.
Yeah. Exactly.
Because it's this, that's fine. That's perfectly fine. So I always say to people, you got to connect with the technique, you got to connect with the practitioner. So for your listeners who think this is woo-woo crap, it's not for them. That's perfectly fine. For your listeners who think this is interesting, give it a try. Give it a try. You could work with me. You can download one of the apps. You can download one of the YouTube videos and things like that. Whatever you want to do, give it a try. And for the people who are like, I've tried other things and this sounds like it really might connect with me, then I'd be happy to help you. Or if you don't like me personally, that's fine too. At least now you know EFT exists and there's practitioners all over the world.
So are you practicing via remote technique today, telemedicine type thing, or?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
So you're able to get people to do sessions online.
Yep. If you speak English and you have the ability to listen to this podcast, I can help you. As long as we can line up our time zones.
Okay.
I've had clients throughout the continental US. I've had clients in Canada, the UK, and South Africa. So yeah, as long as you can line up the time zones, it's fine.
Well, I think we're in line because the show has listeners on 6 continents currently. And
you haven't gotten Antarctica? You haven't gotten those 5 scientists yet?
No, they're not. There are no penguins listening at this point. So, but they're all primarily English markets, and so we've been really blessed for that. But that's great. So how do people get a hold of you, Eric?
So the best way to get a hold of me is to go to my website. It's ericeft.com, and that's Eric with a C.
Okay.
That's the best way to connect with me. I offer a free 20-minute consultation if you want to just get to know me better and just make sure that whatever you want to work on is something that you think will click with, and that's great. Another great way to connect with me would be to follow me on my Facebook page. So you just look up on Facebook, Eric Almeida, EFT practitioner. That'll pop up as well. You can get the links from my website as well.
Sure.
And I also just launched a podcast called the Take a Breather podcast. It's on all the platforms, including YouTube, like yourself. And it's with my colleague, Stacey Every, who's also an EFT practitioner. And we do interviews with other wellness practitioners, but every Thursday we do a tapping Thursday. We encourage our listeners to tap along with us on every different topic. So the topic that we just dropped today, I'm not sure when it's still released, but the topic we dropped today was general anxiety, which I don't know. I've not met a person who's never been anxious before.
No,
so
that's for sure. Well, yeah. You have a technique that just about anybody can use.
Absolutely.
It looks very simple. It looks like a lifetime skill.
Yeah, absolutely.
Learn it, you can actually get to a point where it's like riding a bike. You can implement this. One of the best things I ever learned in managing mental was just mindful. I took a mindful class, and just being able to be present in the moment and breathing and just separating yourself from those. So I think this is what you've got is really interesting, and I think our many of our listeners will take a look. I really do. So one more time, what's that website?
So it's ericeft.com. So ERICEFT.com.
Okay. Now, the $1 million question. I have to ask everybody this. And sometimes if people listen to the end, they've already know the question that's coming. You hear this concept all the time about a bucket list. I'm going to travel to London. I'm going to go to Sao Paulo, Argentina, or I'm going to swim with sharks, or, whatever it happens to be, right? Well, there's an opposite of that, and it rhymes with bucket, and it would start with an F. We're not going to say that word because we have a clean show. What's something that would be on that list?
Oh, something I would never do.
That's right. Something you're never going to do. See, this tells me a lot about my speakers, and then also the next time someone talks about a bucket list, you're going to think about our conversation.
Yep. No, true. Good point.
So what's something that you're never going to do, Eric?
I extremely doubt I would ever jump out of a plane. I think that is ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you.
Yeah, the thought of parachuting is to me is absurd. I don't even like roller coasters. So the thought of that level of intensity, absolutely not. No thanks. I'm good. You guys can have fun.
Yeah.
Not to say it's not safe. I'm just like, no, I'm good.
All right, that's
I'm
good. I'm with you on that one. And then like I have this other one, like I'm never going back to Mexico City. Sorry, done.
I'm sure there's a hilarious story why.
Don't need to have people, driving around with an M16 to make sure we got to our appointments. No, thank you.
Oh dear God. No thanks.
Well, Eric, you've been an amazing guest today. And
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Sharing your story. There's a lot of vulnerabilities when people share their story here. I can tell you this has been really interesting. It's been quite the run. I can't tell you how many interview guests that we've had that were first generation Americans.
Really?
Oh, it's been a bunch. It's been a bunch.
That is an interesting thread there.
And I can tell you that probably 95% of the people have had amazing levels of stress in their life that they built into these successes. So, man, you fit right in those categories. I'm like, you're just right down the middle here today. You're a perfect guest. So it's been fabulous, been fun. I will have you back. I'm going to get some.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're a great interview. And so until next time, folks, this has been the Rex Andrews Show. Just have a few things to say to you. Thank you for listening. Be safe, be bold, and make it a great day.